To most Americans, Gong Li is the face of elegance and power. The woman who carried Memoirs of a Geisha, brought gravity to Miami Vice, and became one of the defining presences in Disney's Mulan. But in China, the country that first made her a star, Gong Li's fame was never just about movies. It was about control, symbolism, and a silent war that followed her for decades. Before she became an international icon, Gong Li was once the pride of mainland cinema, the actress chosen to represent China to the world. But the moment she began shaping her own identity, choosing bold, controversial roles, embracing global filmmaking, and eventually taking Singaporean citizenship, something changed. China no longer viewed her as an asset. She became a risk, a question mark, a woman too influential to fully control. And in a system where every public figure must fit a narrative, someone who does not obey the script becomes a problem. Behind the glossy headlines and red carpet appearances, Gong Li was fighting a war the public never saw. Against censorship boards that feared her artistic freedom, against media voices that questioned her loyalty, and against cultural gatekeepers who insisted that an actress of her magnitude must serve a national purpose. But what happens when an artist refuses to be a symbol? What happens when a woman decides that her voice matters more than the system that built her? And if you were in her place, celebrated abroad, but criticized at home, what would you choose? Her quiet departure from China wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a rebellion. It was something far more dangerous to a system built on obedience, a declaration of independence. Tonight, we uncover the silent war behind Gong Li's rise, her retreat, and the global legacy she built far away from the nation that once tried to claim her. Before the world knew her as the most celebrated Chinese actress of her generation, Gong Li was something even more complicated, the perfect product of a rising film empire. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, China was just beginning to recognize the global potential of cinema. And standing at the center of that transformation was a young woman whose presence on screen was unlike anything audiences had seen before. Directors didn't just cast her. They built entire films around the force of her silence, her restraint, her ability to communicate pain, rebellion, and dignity without saying a word. Her partnership with Zhang Yimou, the visionary filmmaker who led China's fifth-generation movement, solidified her place as the nation's cinematic face. Together, they created films that startled international critics and earned China its first serious recognition at Cannes and Venice. For the government, this was a gift. Finally, a cultural ambassador who projected elegance, depth, and artistic credibility. But what happens when an ambassador becomes bigger than the system she represents? Inside China, the growing attention Gong Li received from the West triggered a quiet discomfort. She wasn't just admired, she was praised, celebrated, elevated to a level of artistic freedom that made officials uneasy. A star who shines too brightly invites questions the system doesn't want asked. Who controls her image? Who shapes her decisions? And, most threatening of all, what happens if she ever stops cooperating? These fears weren't paranoia. They were rooted in something real. Gong Li never behaved like a state-owned star. She wasn't afraid of controversial roles, wasn't afraid of emotional depth that challenged cultural boundaries, wasn't afraid of portraying characters who defied tradition. In a country where narrative consistency matters as much as artistic skill, her independence was both a blessing and a warning. And while the audience adored her, while the West hailed her as China's greatest actress, the people in power saw something different. They saw a woman whose talent transcended borders, whose reputation no longer relied on domestic approval, and whose artistic instincts could not be engineered to fit political goals. This is where the silent war began, not with a scandal, not with a public statement, but with a realization shared quietly among cultural gatekeepers. Gong Li belonged to China's cinema, but China could not claim ownership of her. And in a system defined by control, That alone was enough to turn admiration into suspicion. As Gong Li's fame expanded beyond China's borders, the question shifted from how to promote her to how to contain her. Because for a system that relies on tight narrative control, an actress with global reach is not simply a celebrity, she is a wild card. And Gong Li, with her instinct for bold storytelling and her refusal to soften her craft for political comfort, became increasingly hard to categorize. Her film choices were the first fault line. Many of Gong Li's most acclaimed roles, Ju Do, Raise the Red Lantern, Farewell My Concubine, explored themes considered sensitive in China: betrayal, female autonomy, oppressive traditions, emotional rebellion. These films were loved internationally because they portrayed the complexities of Chinese society with honesty. But at home, their success raised uncomfortable questions. Was Gong Li helping China's cultural rise, or exposing the cracks the government preferred to hide? The answer depended on who you asked. Artists saw her as fearless. Officials saw her as unpredictable. And in a country where unpredictability is a liability, Gong Li's growing independence soon collided with the system's desire for control. State media began framing her international success not as artistic achievement, but as something Western-influenced, something not fully loyal. The message was subtle but clear. Fame is welcome, but autonomy is dangerous. Things intensified when she started accepting roles that didn't align with the state's preferred image of Chinese womanhood. Characters who suffered, resisted, challenged authority, or embraced sensuality were celebrated abroad, but they were scrutinized at home. Critics accused her of misrepresenting Chinese values. Commentators suggested she had been captured by Western ideology. The system didn't have to punish her. All it had to do was question her. And questioning in China is often the first step toward erasing. Behind closed doors, studios were quietly warned that certain themes would make films harder to approve if Gong Li was involved. She wasn't banned. That would spark backlash. But doors began closing silently. Fewer invitations to national galas. Fewer opportunities for officially endorsed projects. Fewer promotional campaigns built around her image. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had become too free. The irony, of course, is that the world outside China adored her precisely for that freedom. Gong Li wasn't shaped by politics. She wasn't a manufactured icon. She was an artist. And in a system built on conformity, an artist who refuses to bend eventually becomes a threat. But the real shift wasn't the criticism. It was the fear behind it. Because the one thing China's cultural authorities couldn't control was China's most talented actress choosing who she wanted to be. The moment Gong Li's name began drifting out of mainland headlines, insiders noticed something strange. She wasn't gone, she wasn't banned, she wasn't disgraced. She was simply missing. Missing from state galas. Missing from cultural festivals. Missing from the carefully curated lists of national actresses regularly promoted by Chinese media. And whenever a major government-backed film assembled its cast, Gong Li's name was never even considered. This wasn't coincidence. It was a tactic. A tactic people inside China's entertainment world refer to quietly, almost fearfully. The soft freeze. A soft freeze isn't a punishment. It's a disappearance engineered through silence. No official statement, no headlines, no scandal. Just a gradual removal from opportunities until the person becomes irrelevant on paper, even if they remain legendary in the public memory. And for someone like Gong Li, whose influence extended beyond borders, this method was the safest way for the system to minimize her presence without provoking backlash. The signs were unmistakable. Projects she once would have led went to younger, more compliant actresses. Directors who praised her privately hesitated to approach her publicly. State media shifted tone, speaking of China's new generation of actresses, while omitting the woman who helped shape global perceptions of Chinese cinema. But what started the freeze? People inside the industry point to a pattern. Gong Li didn't obey the unwritten rules. She didn't attend mandatory political events. She didn't participate in state-led promotions. She didn't reshape her artistic identity to align with cultural directives. And most importantly, she didn't rely on the system for survival. Hollywood wanted her. European filmmakers wanted her. Festival juries wanted her. She had something no system likes an artist to possess: options. And options create danger. Rumors began swirling that she had grown too Western, that she no longer represented Chinese women, that her Singaporean citizenship made her symbolically unreliable. None of these accusations were official, but all of them circulated strategically. A whisper campaign doesn't need evidence, it just needs repetition. The soft freeze didn't silence Gong Li. It attempted to claim ownership of her absence. If she wasn't making films in China anymore, the message wasn't that the system pushed her out. No, the message was that she didn't fit, that she drifted too far, that the industry had simply moved on. But audiences quietly wondered, how does a country move on from its greatest actress? And who benefits from pretending she no longer mattered? Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. When a system cannot control brilliance, it doesn't eliminate it. It erases the spaces where brilliance could shine. When Gong Li stepped onto a Hollywood set for the first time, something shifted. Not in her. She was the same disciplined actress who built her career on subtlety and precision, but in the way China perceived her. Because in Hollywood, Gong Li wasn't just an actress, she was a revelation. Directors admired her craft. Co-stars praised her emotional intelligence. Studios called her the greatest Chinese actress of all time. And for the first time, she operated in a system where her talent wasn't filtered through cultural politics, national narratives, or ideological instruction. Hollywood valued her independence. China feared it. Her breakout international roles, Memoirs of a Geisha, Miami Vice, Hannibal Rising, and later Mulan, weren't merely career-building opportunities. They were statements. Gong Li didn't belong to any single nation anymore. She belonged to cinema, and in an era when China and the West increasingly use film as geopolitical messaging, that kind of artistic neutrality becomes dangerous. Inside Beijing's cultural apparatus, the rise of Gong Li in Hollywood triggered a different kind of alarm. She was becoming a global face, but not a state-designed one. She represented Chinese artistry, but on her own terms, without the polished ideological veneer expected from a national icon. And the fact that she thrived abroad without China's backing undermined a central tenet of the system: that stars succeed because the system allows them to succeed. Hollywood, meanwhile, saw in Gong Li what China tried to minimize: a woman unafraid of complexity. Directors like Michael Mann cast her because she brought gravity to roles most performers couldn't handle. Disney chose her for Mulan because she symbolized strength, legacy, and a level of screen presence that transcends language. In Los Angeles, Gong Li wasn't a political symbol. She was an artist, and that alone earned her power. But in China, influence without oversight becomes a liability. As Hollywood praised her, Chinese media shifted tone yet again. Articles questioned her citizenship. Social commentators suggested she was drifting too far from Chinese culture. Nationalists accused her of abandoning her roots, even as her films continued to elevate Chinese stories globally. The criticism wasn't about her acting, it was about control, or rather, the loss of it. Because Hollywood didn't just give Gong Li visibility, it gave her protection. It gave her a platform China couldn't shape. And above all, it proved she didn't need the system that once tried to mold her. This created a symbolic tension. Was Gong Li still China's greatest actress? Or was she now a Hollywood property? The question terrified cultural policymakers. An independent, globally beloved Chinese woman with no political alignment is the one thing no propaganda machine knows how to handle. And so, the soft freeze deepened. Quietly, strategically, predictably. Hollywood opened a door. China closed a window. And Gong Li, for the first time, stood entirely outside the house she once helped build. By the time Gong Li quietly stepped away from mainland cinema, the move looked almost effortless. There was no explosive conflict, no public argument, no dramatic break. She simply stopped appearing in the places where she once dominated. To the casual observer, it felt like a natural career shift, a legendary actress transitioning toward global projects. But to those who understood the industry, Gong Li's retreat wasn't a coincidence. It was a conscious refusal to keep playing a game she no longer believed in. The truth is that Gong Li didn't leave China because she fell out of favor. She left because she had reached a level of artistic clarity where staying would have meant surrendering the very qualities that made her extraordinary. As censorship tightened and state messaging became more rigid, creative risks evaporated. Films that once explored emotional truth were reshaped to fit cultural directives. Characters became symbols rather than human beings. Stories were engineered, not told. And an artist like Gong Li cannot survive inside a world built on obedience. Behind the scenes, the pressure was unmistakable. Invitations to politically significant events came with expectations. Scripts submitted for approval were returned with instructions on how to align characters with national values. Even interviews required caution. The industry was shrinking around her, not in size, but in freedom. And for someone who built her entire career on emotional authenticity, that shrinkage was suffocating. The moment that defined everything wasn't a public one, it was private. Those close to her recall that Gong Li asked a simple question, one every artist eventually confronts. If I can no longer choose my own roles, what am I still doing here? It wasn't anger, it wasn't rebellion, it was clarity. Hollywood may have embraced her, but it didn't save her. She saved herself by choosing a world where she could breathe, where she could portray complexity without fear of ideological backlash, where her craft mattered more than her alignment. And in doing so, she did something almost unthinkable for a Chinese superstar. She chose personal freedom over national expectation. The consequences of that decision were subtle but unmistakable. State media minimized her presence. Online narratives reframed her success as foreign. Nationalists questioned her loyalty, but none of it changed her reality. Gong Li was free. Not institutionally free, not politically free, artistically free. And that is a form of freedom far more threatening to controlled systems than any political statement could ever be. In Western interviews, she never spoke negatively about China. She never exposed backstage politics or criticized censorship. Silence was her shield. Distance was her strategy. And dignity was her final act of defiance. In a world where celebrities build brands by shouting, Gong Li protected her legacy by saying nothing at all. So why did she truly leave? Because she understood something simple and profound. A system that tries to own your image will eventually try to own your identity. And once that happens, you are no longer an artist, you are a product. Gong Li refused to be a product. She refused to let politics rewrite her creative voice. She refused to let fame become an obligation. She refused to let a nation claim ownership of her talent. And in choosing to walk away, she became something far more powerful than a national icon. She became a global one, accountable only to her craft, her values, and herself. Her exit wasn't a disappearance. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a declaration that brilliance does not belong to systems. It belongs to the people brave enough to protect it. When you step back and look at Gong Li's journey, not the headlines, not the Hollywood premieres, but the quiet decisions that shaped her path, a pattern emerges. She didn't rise because the system lifted her. She rose because she never waited for permission. And she didn't leave China because she was pushed out. She left because staying would have required her to become someone she wasn't. That's the part of her story most people miss. The courage in the quiet choices. The strength in walking away without bitterness. The dignity in choosing freedom over comfort. Authenticity over safety. And self-respect over national expectation. And maybe that's why her legacy resonates so deeply outside China. Because her story mirrors something many of us have faced in our own lives. A moment when a familiar place stops recognizing who we are. A moment when loyalty becomes a burden. A moment when the cost of staying outweighs the fear of leaving. So ask yourself, if your career, your identity, or your passion were slowly being shaped by forces you didn't believe in, would you have the courage to step away like she did? Or would you stay, hoping the system eventually treated you the way you deserved? There's no easy answer, but Gong Li found hers. She didn't fight the system. She didn't expose it. She didn't try to change it. She simply outgrew it and moved into a world where her voice belonged entirely to her. If her story made you rethink talent, fame, or freedom, tell me what part struck you the most. Because sometimes the battles that shape us aren't the ones we fight publicly, but the ones we refuse to fight at all.